Hey guys, thanks for joining us. I know it's a different time from our normal format on a Saturday afternoon, but we've got to take care of those New Zealanders. The time zone's a little bit crazy. A short while ago, we did one with one of the other New Zealand suppliers that we got, and they were falling asleep in their glasses. So we thought we'd try it at a slightly different time this time. So Wilco, thanks for joining us. It's really great to have you with us. Just lost your pen. Where are you? Do that. I have to say, this is born of a bit of selfishness on my part. I think I was with one of our clients some years back in Martinborough, and we happened to be at the Dry River Winery, and it was before you were there. Poppy was making the wine at the time, so I'm not sure what vintages that would have involved. This would have been around about 2008, 2009 that we were there, something like that.
Yeah.
And the thing that, aside from the fact, the wines are glorious, the thing that really made such an impression on me was this incredible ability for your aromatics to age. I was absolutely amazed by the quality of the Gris and the Gewurz. We have significant success with the Gewurz across the spectrum. So this is it's a good opportunity for us to take a closer look at the Gris this time, and then of course to take a look at the Pinot Noirs as well. So maybe if we can get the guys to put in their glasses. I don't know how many glasses you got in front of you, but those first three, the Gris 11, 16, and 17. So jars 1, 2, and 3. First impression I've got of it, I poured these, didn't taste them this afternoon. But the first impression, of course, is the color, Wilco. It's extraordinary, the difference. I'm not sure if you're pouring them with us there tonight.
I am. I've got them right here. I'm pretty much carving all the bottles. So
okay.
no, I had a dig into a cellar.
Certainly in the phenolics, they just come straight at me in terms of the differences in the phenolics. They very very singular in their characteristics.
Yeah, I think you pretty much nailed it. That is really what we want to focus on. Sure, the aromatics they come with it, part of the style of farming and the sort of way we pick them. We'd like to pick them quite late, so we've got this really broad spectrum of aromatics. But the phenolics is key. The phenolics and the tannins and the structure of the wine is that's everything for us.
Yeah.
So obviously from a cellaring perspective and an ageability, alcohol, phenolics, tannins, they're just fantastic vehicles or vessels for the wine to evolve on and with. So they're what we found for.
But can you possibly paint for us a comparison between the 11, 16, and 17 as vintages go for these three?
This is the 11.
11 is jar 1. Someone's asking.
Okay. Yeah. So 11, 16, and 17.
Yep.
They're actually fairly similar. I was just going through all the harvest records. In terms of heat accumulation and growing degree days, the 11 and the 16 fairly similar in terms of total heat accumulation. The 16 slightly warmer. However, the 17 was we had the most rainfall towards the end of the season. So the 11 very benign season. I actually quite remember. Sorry, I remember it quite well because it was a year where we had a lot of easterlies and a lot of thunderstorms. And I remember we had to run out of the vineyard one year because the thunderstorm very rarely came over us. And it sort of kept the vineyard quite fresh. we're dry farmed. We don't use irrigation, so rainfall is really, really important for us, and not sort of necessarily the 5 mil or the 10 mils. We rely on sort of 50 to 75 mil rain event and more for that water to permeate the soil and to keep the vines sort of fresh and functioning. In years where that doesn't happen, we get a lot more concentration and depth, obviously, with the wine in terms of the aromatics and the fruitfulness and the mouthfeel. But yeah, we need significant rain for that. But in 11, it was sort of the freshness really that of the soils that kept that wine alive. 16, very, very dry. Was one of our driest years on record, and it came actually off sort of the 13, the 14, and the 15, all very dry years. Little winter rains to recover for these vines. And we had to prune really hard in the vineyard, smaller yields in 16. As a result, we saw the vineyard suffer from sort of 4 years of lower rainfall, but gave beautiful depth to the wine, really. And then 17, sort of the drought was broken in the winter. There was a lot more vigor in the vineyard. We pruned quite hard, so that the whole vineyard came back quite nicely. And then towards the end of the season, we got a lot more rain, so a later harvest for the 17.
So for the 11, I don't know how everyone else feels in their glasses. Obviously, we're dealing with cork enclosures, so there's going to be variance now with the wines at this age. I'm picking up more residual sweetness in 11, and it actually gets progressively drier, so 11 through to 17. So is that tracking the heat, as you were talking about, 11 being a hotter year, riper fruit, Beaumet levels higher and higher, or is it something else contained within the construct?
I think it's something else. I think I took over sort of in the 12 vintage, and we started immediately with an organic wine growing regime, biodynamic wine growing regime that we implemented. And we have seen a shift of the sort of Neil and the poppy period, where they probably set on with a lot higher residual sugars. They weren't shying away from sort of 30 grams residual sugar per liter or more. I liked to pick a little bit earlier, not much, but it could only be sort of 4 or 5 days difference. Slightly lower residual sugar, and if we just still try to keep to that sort of 13.5, 14, sometimes 14.5% alcohol to keep the buoyancy alive. The alcohol really keeps the buoyancy and spread of the wine. And with a slightly higher acidity, for me the wine just felt sort of, I could see more of the wine. Yes. And that's what I really like. The residual sugar is friendly and maybe brings a certain ease of drinking, but it sort of, for me, hides a lot of that structure and phenolics on the mid to the back palate, and I really wanted to show that. Yes. So over time, our wines have started to
it's kind of like, for me, making the journey from 11 to 17. It's kind of like you're twisting the volume up on the clarity and the purity of the wine. Everything seems to, it's almost like you're in a telescope and you're kind of just focusing on the fruit itself, and the aromatics come into such focus. There's a sort of linearity about 16 and 17 that is far more amped than the 11, I would argue.
Yes, thank you for seeing that. And with the change in viticulture also comes a change in winemaking. We do want to have the idea that everything we do in a vineyard sort of carries through in the cellar with how we look at the wine as a total picture, really. It sort of we wanted to bring out more texture, so the fermentation are now all spontaneous. We don't use yeast. It's something we started with in 12 as well, and try to extend those ferments as well. Faster ferments generally means there's a bit more focus on sort of aromatics, but for us, the longer the ferment was, the more mouthfeel we're starting to create, a more maybe umami sort of feel of the palate.
Yes.
And again, is bring that mid palate out really.
Right. Looking at 16 and 17 side by side, the 16 for me is more about a green apple on the nose. The 17, I'm getting more like urgent spice notes, sort of ginger, that lemongrass kind of action. It's quite interesting to compare the characteristics of these two vintages because they're extraordinarily different. There's definitely a thread that binds them from a winemaking stylistic point of view. They're definitely made by the same people in the same place, but are speaking of very different conditions of the 2 years.
Very. With sort of picking later in the season can come a bit of shrivel. We can encounter botrytis. Generally not so much botrytis infection in Pinot Gris. It's a pretty thick-skinned variety. But in 17, we definitely saw a bit of that coming in. So there's was a bit more shrivel and a little bit more botrytis influence in that wine. So no doubt. So that might sort of explain some of those more spicy notes in the 17.
In the 17. I would also, I don't know how you feel, sort of asking questions that I think people might ask. The cellaring windows of these three Gris, well, certainly 11 is going to be different from 16 and 17, right? Do you see a different path?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I think the cellaring window, we still see a good evolution, but obviously very different with years that brings such different climatic conditions. No year here is the same. Every year throws a different problem at us. But yeah, for me, the 16 is probably the one that I would just sort of tuck away. Definitely the longest. I see the path there. The one is just a bit more shy and a bit more closed still, really. The 11 is starting to open up really lovely. I think the 11 is just, for me, a real pleasant wine that should be drank from now on. Definitely. The 17, generally sort of in those more difficult years, especially towards the end. As a young wine, I never see them as very hospitable. The window opens sort of after a year, about 8 years, 10 years, and then probably the window closes a bit more rapidly as well. Where, for example, with that 16, the opening window is a lot wider.
I think the thing that probably takes it home for me on a straight lineup, the preference lineup would be 16, because I'm quite intrigued by the fattiness in the palate, in the mid palate. There's this beautiful sort of oiliness in the palate, which I can immediately start thinking about food and just how many things would just rocket out of the park as a food and wine combination. It's so interesting. I remember I think it was James Halliday who once wrote that drinking Pinot Gris is like painting on a white easel with water or something. Lou once spoke to me. We joked about it the one time, but I think that's kind of the reference that it was made in regards to Australian Gris. But there's just something completely exceptional about River. And after first discovering these, of course, I've hunted around, and I'm still on the hunt, but I've never come across another label in New Zealand that does Gris quite with this kind of masterful stroke. There's a gravitas about your Gris that I've yet to find anywhere else. If there's anyone in the room who has followed Gris as well, Colin, what do you think about it? Have you found any other New World Gris? I don't know if he's listening or just got his window on. No reply.
Here he comes.
Sorry, a bit of multitasking here. In terms of Pinot Gris, I think for me, just the off-dry nature of sort of some of the Kiwi ones is a little different from most of the ones. Like certainly Alsatian ones I have tend to be more dry. I think it's interesting trying these, given a little bit of age, where the acids probably kind of leveled off a little bit.
is missing it, the milk.
Sorry, let me just.
Yeah, no,
The acids. You mean the acids are leveling off?
yeah, no, I mean they're not like super sharp. They're kind of
Yeah.
nicely integrated, I think, in the 16 and 17.
Yeah.
There's a smokiness to these as well, which I think is pretty cool. So that's kind of a little different for me.
Cool.
Yeah, obviously, as Colin sort of briefly mentioned, Alsace is for us the benchmark. That's what we look at without a doubt. So the Weinbach, even Marcel Dice, to name sort of just two of, for me, iconic Alsace wines that I would just love to match and drink those and get inspiration from, really on how I look at Pinot Gris. Yeah.
Do your soils come to match anything that are coming out of Alsace? I'm really trying to focus in on what creates this individuality of terroir that you guys have.
Yeah, no, the soils here are quite different, really.
Okay.
There is very little in Martinborough. There's very, quite low pH, quite acidic soils. There's very little limestone in these soils. So, no, very, very different.
Excellent. Okay, let's have a look at these two Pinots now. I'm coming off a position of great, what's the word? Parochial? No, I'm very biased. I don't have the right word to that. About this 10. It's for some reason I've had friends who have brought it on a regular basis to tastings and what have you. So I've probably tasted it. I'd say every 6 months for the last 3 or 4 years. It's one of the few wines that I've had the luxury of being able to do, and it's something I'm really attracted to. So this is, and again, this emulates the style of Dry River, right? Don't ever buy anything to drink next week. You have to take a long view. The house style, no matter whether it's you or Poppy or Neil, the wines need a lot of time. And I think that's the reason why so many people have not had the true Dry River experience, because it really is a 10-year, it really is a 10-year investment one makes in these wines.
Yeah, absolutely, Robert. It's been Neil's sort of mentor, really, forever, and we've definitely carried that through with our wines, hopefully. The challenge is, in this world where everybody likes instant gratification, is to present wines that maybe aren't the most friendly, or what the wines are meant to be aren't really shown in that first couple of years, really. And even these days with cellars, people live in apartments, and it's becoming a bit harder to really sell a wine and to come with that story. But we just love to hold on to that. And I think with sort of the production levels are so low here that we can actually hold on to that quite well. But I think that the style or the way some of the inherent sort of qualities have still remained, but sort of that gray zone around that core of the wine have definitely changed with sort of my path and my evolution here at Dry River.
I think another example of that is one of your neighbours. In fact, there's a couple of your neighbours I can think of. Escarpment, a bit further down. And at Orangi, where you see them getting these massive spores, and I mean just incredibly inflationary spores, and you open them and you think, obviously I'm not seeing what the critics are seeing, because 5 or 6 years later, slowly that quality comes out. You really have to wait. And I think to a certain degree, Singapore is quite a compressed example of that, Wilco, where we have bomb shelters here in Singapore. I'm sure they weren't built as bomb shelters, but everyone calls them bomb shelters. And a lot of people I know have their wines in there, in wine fridges. But you're kind of hampered by the 120 bottle rule, which is sort of the standard size bottling. Every now and again, somebody gets the religion and starts storing. There's a couple of people in the call tonight who I know have cellars littered around Singapore, but by and large, long-term cellaring is a very difficult thing to achieve here in Singapore, just from the cost of storage, the cost and space. And
I'm sure.
Yeah. So being able to show these back vintages and have limited amounts available for sale is very good. So considering you haven't made the 10 yourself, how would you compare vintage 10 to 17?
Yeah, I mean, I was here, but I wasn't responsible.
Cool.
Responsible for the winemaking, but I was definitely here. So the 10 was actually quite a warm vintage, really leading up to sort of through flowering. Then January, February, they were definitely warm months, and then it cooled off really quickly. March, April, the temperatures dropped a lot, and we had a few sort of light frosts, or even during harvest, that we don't see that often. But that kept the vibrancy alive there, where the vintage was starting to look sort of quite like a dark and deep wine. That last sort of slowing down of the ripening in those last 2 months was vital almost to keep a beautiful freshness. So that was 10. 17 followed almost a similar path, quite warm leading up to the vintage, but it sort of stayed fairly warm, and then it totally was marred by a huge rain event that we had. So we probably had only done 2 picks in sort of mid-March. And we had about 180 mils of rain in the space of a week, really. So some people sort of tried to pick in between. We decided just to wait and to ride it all out. And we waited for nearly 3 weeks post the rain, just to let everything dry out again, to let the water disappear. And we kicked off, I think it was the 7th of April again, with the rest of our Pinot harvest, really. So it was definitely a vintage of 2 halves.
That must have been nerve-wracking, with half your harvest in and the other half still on the vineyard. My God.
Yeah, I hadn't experienced such rain event at that stage. Ever since, we've had a few, and they're incredible learning moments. I mean, you're powerless. I was standing outside in the vineyard, almost sort of screaming out of powerlessness. But now I almost wished that I set the whole harvest through the rain. That we, because we picked those 2 picks, we saw the rain coming, and we was like, okay, let's pick those 2 blocks and have something safe in the winery. The vineyard was so resilient and incredibly robust. It was amazing. The last part of the vintage was really incredible. And now in hindsight, I wish that we just didn't jump the gun. But it is what it is, really.
Yeah, rather safe than sorry. Geez, I would hate to have to make those decisions. I can barely decide on toothpaste every month. So, what's an interesting one for me with the 10 is how over the last couple of years, it's progressively lifted, and there's this kind of sweet leather component that seems to come into it, almost a waxiness, a lanolin kind of component. And I sometimes pick it up in very old Adorangi, and I find it very compelling. There's this very, very sensual kind of top note that I find in yours.
Yeah, I think, I'm not really sure about the older Adarangis, how they composed as sort of the makeup of those wines is blocks and clones. We're virtually just 2 different clones, and that's it. It's what we call clone 5 and 10 by 5. And one of us is a later harvest variety, the other one is early, and they can be quite different to each other. One a bit more plummy, the other one very Christmas spicy. And
so is the 10 by 5 the one that's lending this texture, this wonderful rippling sort of silky cashmere texture. Is
correct?
that
Correct.
okay?
The tannin of the 10x5 is incredible. It's sort of the clone that was planted, that was one of the first ones that was planted together with sort of one of the Abel, the Atarangi clone, and clone 5. Those were the sort of the three dominant clones in the early 80s, and then a whole string of sort of new modern clones came that we just didn't participate in planting. But it definitely keeps the wine deeper and darker, and the layers come out after several years. What you say is sort of when you peel away the wine over the years, there's actually a really beautiful lifted core in that wine that starts to show. And I think that sort of lanolin character comes again from the 10x5.
Yeah, it's interesting because up until now, it's never had this weightless component to it. In years up until now, tasting this 10, it's that one component which not just wasn't there, but now it's there. And for me, that seems to represent a time where it's time to start thinking about drinking it. I think when it starts to get that effortless grace about it, which the 10 definitely has now, for me, that's a sign to bring out the corkscrew and start enjoying the wine thoroughly. It seems like it pulls everything together.
Yeah, definitely. The tannins. It's now a lot more sitting in the leather lounge chair.
Yeah.
You can sink away a bit more into the wine, and there is not that sort of nervous structure or sticking out tannins showing too much. The wine is now in a beautiful sort of transparent platform, and it's lovely moving over there.
Yeah. I know it's how long's a piece of string, but how do you, from now onwards, would you give this another 5 years in this kind of pristine state?
Yeah, I suppose I would. I'm just not with sort of Pinot Noir or Dry River Pinot Noir. I like certain windows where I enjoy the wine. Sure, you can sit on the wine for longer, but for me to get that joy out of sort of walking through that forest and seeing all the different trees and on a cushiony ground, I think that's where this is right now, and that's where I'd like to drink them. So for me, that is between 10 and 15 years.
Okay.
If we want to go for longer cellaring years, we've got to start thinking about Syrah, really. But that for me is the drinking window.
It's so interesting to see this kind of juxtaposition where your whites are something that probably have longer reaches by and large. That 16 Gris, for example, I would say another 10 years because those acids are so incredibly focused and aligned. Would you agree with that sentiment, or am I being a bit too ambitious?
No, I think absolutely. I have the hardest time convincing people about that. Really, is everybody always thinks sort of it's either red wine that evolves or sells for longer, and not white wine. And if people think white wine, it might be sort of even Riesling is probably the first one that people think about cellarability and evolution. But Pinot Gris, to me, it's just. That underdog really that just takes people by surprise, and it's beautiful taking these wines to tastings, especially sort of when they've got sort of 10, 15, 20 years of cellarability on them.
It's these in fact all of your wines are wines that I love to do in blind tastings, because as a rule I'm pretty hopeless at that anyway, but there's nothing better than bringing Dry River to blind tastings to Francophiles, because it really messes with them. Because they would, there's so many times where people have accused me of decanting and trying to put them off the trail of what they're tasting on the night, etc. Because they really do have a uniqueness about it. Question from Colin about production size. I'm just going to grab a Shiraz glass while you answer that question.
Yeah, sure. Our total production is about 2,500 cases maximum. That's in a good year. And we look at Pinot Noir at about 900 cases a year. The Pinot Gris, Gewürztraminer, and Riesling sit roughly between 150 to 180 cases, and probably Syrah as well. So, our Pinot Noir, even though it's like I look at our flagship wines, Gris, and Pinot Gris. It's obviously Pinot Noir that is the most important variety at about 900 cases. That's the biggest sort of production variety for us. But yeah, we like not to put all our eggs in one basket.
All right. On to the Syrah. First thing jumping out of the glass tonight is coffee for me. Just lots of espresso and mocha.
Right. Sorry, I'm not quite there yet.
Okay. It's interesting because normally I'd reference violets and black pepper as the sort of benchmark stamps in the Syrah, but it's showing some different nuances tonight, which is great. Yeah, we're on the 17 as well.
17, yeah. Obviously, what I just sort of, or what we just talked about with that rain event in sort of late March or mid-March, sort of onwards, that brought normally for us. Okay, so irrigation it can be used quite successfully to bring really beautiful sort of more red spectrum aromatics out. And if we don't have that, then the wine becomes darker, and obviously that really helps with Syrah.
Yeah.
When there is significant rain, that for us mimics that irrigation event that some people can use to sort of bring lightness in. And that's what we saw in 17. So for us, Syrah, we normally pick that late April, early May. So we just had to push that picking window out a lot more to really get a bit more darkness out of that wine. I was a little bit scared, to be honest, with Syrah that year. We have a little bit of Viognier on the property, and we've never really used that. As a sort of co-fermentation with Syrah, and this was the first year that I used about just over 1% of Viognier in the ferment, because I really wanted to glue the tannins together. I think it's a beautiful way to fill out some of the tannins, and it felt to me at the time of harvest that the tannins were still a bit too spiky, so we used the Viognier skins to help glue those tannins over a little bit. That was the idea.
It's extraordinary, the power of Viognier, right? Just the tiniest smattering is a total game changer to the tapestry of the wine. Really fascinating.
Yes. I sort of I lived with the tradition of not using it for all that time, and 17 we just had to take the plunge into the world of mixing Viognier, Rhone or Clonakilla wines. Really very successful, extraordinary wines. And we had a guy working here at Vintage who had experience with Clonakilla wines. He worked here, so it was really a nice opportunity to sort of use his expertise to just to experiment and push boundaries. Really, I think tradition is great, but the one thing that we do want to bring is sort of the move into the 21st century, and to make sure that that we keep pushing.
Well, it's interesting. You're not hanging your hat on Syrah, Northern or Southern Rhone or anything. You're just using it when the vintage calls for it, which is a wonderful sort of versatility about it. I remember once talking to Tim, there might be some people in the call tonight, and if I remember correctly, he was saying that his percentage runs from 2 to 7, depending on the year. Whatever the numbers were, it was far broader than I expected, because this Viognier is so profoundly game-changing in the style and what you eventually end up with in the glass. It's incredibly powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. I think because I met him on one of my trips. I think it was to sort of Singapore and Hong Kong.
Oh, okay.
And we had discussed all that. So it was all sitting still in the back of my head, and I thought, we got to do something like this.
Did he end up pulling out his guitar and playing for you? He loves to play. When he's had 2 or 3 glasses of wine, I'm sure he's a frustrated musician. I'm sure that deep down he wishes he was on the stage instead of in the vineyard.
I haven't heard him play yet.
Haven't you? Oh no, and he's pretty good too. It's excellent. Another question from Colin. Do you use whole bunch for either the Pinot or Syrah?
For Pinot Noir, absolutely. We and to varying degrees too, really depending on the vintage. So warmer vintages generally a high percent whole bunch that we use, and especially sort of for what we call here our River State vineyard, and a little bit in a Crakel vineyard. If it's a warmer vintage and we see more deeper, darker characters, the whole bunch percentage goes up, just to bring some more sort of pretty characters back in the wine, so it doesn't sort of all look so deep and dark. Really, it gets sort of slightly different fermentation sort of kinetics, but with Syrah generally not. But we have actually done that in 18. We've it was a fantastic year, and again we just wanted to experiment a little bit. And we used just more crushed whole bunch. So with Pinot Noir, we just leave it all intact, and it goes in the ferment vessel as whole bunches. With the Syrah, we actually foot stomped on the whole bunch component in 2018, but not in this one. We just generally just keep destem the wine.
It's interesting because the Syrah, I'm thinking there's one other producer in Martinborough. I should know the name, but it's gone out of my head now. Japanese producer.
Yeah, Hiro Kasuda.
Kasuda, yeah. If I was to think of Kasuda next to this, this is way more subtle and softer. There's a nuance and a gentleness about the wine that if I can put it next to Kasuda is just bigger. There's just this question of size about, and I'm not sure if that's driven by clone or there's so many reasons why, even stylistically, the way he approaches the winemaking. But what's really appealing for me here in the glass tonight is the sort of soft potpourri, purple flower, talc kind of thing that's slowly but surely emerging out of the glass to a lesser degree than so often happens. It's a bit more nuanced and quieter in this particular vintage, but I really find it appealing. You know, so much Shiraz and Syrah that we drink out of Australia is just lacking in the finesse that you're giving us in the glass. Question for Wymoon: how something different does crushing the whole bunch in 18 make? I think she means what difference does it make?
Yeah. Well, generally with keeping berries intact, and you can do that with really good destemmers as well. But the stem component is quite important. So if we leave the stems whole, there'll be sort of less extraction of tannins out of the stems. But if we slightly give them a bit of a crush, and we press a bit of, call it a bit of stem juice out, and they're a bit more damaged, there'll be a bit more extraction out of those stems as well. And they're quite a different type of tannin as opposed to either seed or skin tannins. So crushing those stems made a difference in how we were trying to work with the tannins in the 2018 vintage in the Syrah. But also we weren't necessarily looking at sort of that intracellular sort of fermentation. So to get the really pretty aromatics out, we were actually trying to help that ferment a little bit more, get a bit more extraction, because it was such a good ripe year. So we just try to get more out of that wine, more power out of that wine, because we felt the vintage really lent itself for it.
The big thing with whole bunch maturation in the Australia experience, or the warmer climate experience, is the sappiness that often comes in the eventual end product, but there's not even a hint of that here. This is way more nuanced and graceful.
Yeah, I've never made Shiraz in Australia, but I can just make the assumption that here we are in the cooler climate. and not in the hot tub. We hardly ever experience days over 30 degrees. So that heat that we get to sort of, get that ripeness, or that deep and dark ripeness that they get in Australian Syrahs, we just don't get that really. So yeah, for us, it's a hanging game towards the end of the season. Is get that ripeness in terms of the tannins, but also for the interaction between the tannins and the acidity to really work. Which it's a waiting game here, always.
I'm thinking even in the Pyrenees, which I think is the highest altitude Shiraz in Australia. I'm pretty sure I'm right about that. Right at the top, there's a vineyard, and it just doesn't have the nuance that you're experiencing here. I think that they certainly by altitude far higher. I'm not sure of the climatic differences. I'd argue that in winter they're pretty cold up there. But still, it's a Shiraz for me. It doesn't have this kind of, I don't know, this sort of eloquence about it that you're putting in the glass here. It's a really delicious drop. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, we're very happy with that Syrah as well. It's been just a phenomenal story for New Zealand. It was one of the first vines or first varieties brought into New Zealand back in sort of the 1850s by James Busby. And this is a descendant of that variety or clone that he brought in, and it's just a wonderful story for New Zealand that isn't celebrated enough, in my opinion, really. So yeah.
Well, I think that your particular patch of paradise, though, is quite rarefied, because I think often I reference back to Waiheke Island or Hawke's Bay for most of the Syrah that I've drunk out of New Zealand, and the finesse is not quite as profoundly evident as it is in your part of the world, and in Dry River. There's something just a little bit more special about it, which I really love.
Thank you.
I'm mindful of keeping you too awake late at night. Are there any more questions from anybody here before we say goodbye to you? No questions from anybody. I don't think Lou's on the call anymore. I can't see him very clearly.
Here I am.
Oh, are you there? Okay. Lou has a question that he likes to ask winemakers at the end of the night. So I'll hand over to him.
Hey, Wilco, it seems like 3 years since we last spoke to each other, actually.
That's right.
Geez, I can still remember my wife being upset with me that night. It still reminds me. But anyway, the question I always ask our guest winemakers is, when no one's looking and you don't have to be accountable to anyone, what do you enjoy drinking on your own? What do you reach for first to fill your own glass? And not from Dry River.
No. I drink enough Dry River really to.
The first honest winemaker. Usually the answer is, it's got to be Winery X.
No. Actually, I really love crisp, dry whites from warm climates. So I love Assitico. I love Domaine Tempier white. For me, that's just fantastic wine. If I just want to sort of grab something out of the cellar, really, and I don't have to worry about budget or something. That's Tempier. I love it. So white, crisp whites. That's on the table most of the time with us. But for reds, I'd go Barolo really.
Barolo. Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Cool.
Yeah. I did a bit of work in Italy, and I'm originally from Holland. And we always sort of made a bit of fun out of the Italians. I never went on holiday to Italy, never. And then I know, right? And then I went to Italy, and it just completely changed my view. You just have to go to Italy to really appreciate that.
Well, you have to understand. Whilst my name is Lou, that is short for Luigi Fortunato Ghirardello. So watch where you're going.
Oh no, I'm not trying to step on your toes. I honestly had life-changing and winemaking changing experiences there. So it was phenomenal. And sort of there, the people that I was with, they took me under their wing and they took me out really. And Barolo, it just became the wine. And I remember I sort of worked at Bell Hill, and it was one of the questions to me too. It's like, what is your favorite wine? And I said, well, it has to be Nebbiolo. And they said, well, we have to change that. And I said, oh, I'm not sure if you can.
In fact, aren't there a few vines of Nebbiolo on the Dry River site? I'm sure I saw it on the geology maps that there was a little.
No, it's Tempranillo.
Is it Tempranillo? Okay.
Yeah, but we've walked away from that experiment. So right. Climate change doesn't make the difference for Tempranillo.
Yeah. Well, one thing, I was lucky enough to be in the Barolo region just 3 weeks ago, and one of the very clear themes, in fact, going all the way through the centre of Rhone, Champagne and into Barolo, it's just so dry there at the moment. So climate change amongst everyone that we met on the road was very much a topic. Now, weather changes, whether that's part of the whole climate change discussion or not is another matter, but certainly it's very dry in the Barolo at the moment. Are you seeing a movement in your climate patterns there?
Oh yes, absolutely, and it's one of my for us. Dry farming make and the changes we see in the weather they have profound impacts really, and everything that we do now from replanting, we've got a few blocks here on sort of old wood stocks that are drought tolerant and very vigorous wood stocks that are not very popular or haven't been popular at all in the last 40 years, and we've been trying to revive those in the last we started in 14. Revive those and start replanting on those, because any other rootstock that requires irrigation is you just can't use those anymore, really, in my opinion, really. So yeah, hopefully we see a better or move to better rootstocks that are better sort of conditioned to the new normal, really.
Thanks.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for that, Wilco. Thanks for joining us tonight. Everybody, thanks to the generosity of Wilco and his exporting agent, we're able to offer you guys $20 discount on any Dry River wine orders that you make between now and end of tomorrow. So just throw in the notes that it's a wine tasting order and we will adjust the invoicing for you. Thank you all for joining us. Wilco, thanks so much. And I hope to drink some more wine with you next time.
I look forward to coming up to Singapore as soon as I can and as soon as things are open. So it might be next year, really.
Yeah, I think so. But
keep it on the safe side.
Yeah, sooner the better, though.
Yeah. All right.
All right. Thanks so much,
Robert and everybody. Thank you for joining us, and I hope to see you all soon. Thank you, Robert.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks all. Good night. Enjoy your long weekend.
Ciao.
Bye.